South Africa's murder rate of 36 per 100,000 people is still 5 times higher than the world average. It's no secret that we've seen a rise in the number of violent crimes and murders. Ask anyone where the most crime is, invariably it will be in their own city or town. The Urban Safety Reference Group has released a survey on the state of crime and safety in South African cities. This is South Africa's murder rate per 100,000 people. The murder rate halved between 1994 and 2012, but then started to tick up slightly from there. However, researchers point out there's been a stabilization of 36 murders per 100,000 people over the last 2 years. It could now be important to see what 2020's results bring. Cape Town still has the highest number of murders overall and the highest murder rate, the highest number per 100,000 people. Nelson Mandela Bay in the Eastern Cape has a high number of murders for the population. We'll be running these graphics and others again in our upcoming discussion. You'll be able to take another look at them. Siphelele Ngobese is with the South African Cities Network. She's been conducting a deep dive into some of these numbers to have a look at what they tell us. Siphelele, good evening to you. Thank you for your time today. Obviously, there seem to be slightly different pictures in different metros, but overall, are you seeing certain trends that are happening across all of the big cities when it comes to crime?
Certainly. What we're seeing and what we've maintained over the last couple of years, it seems like the story is not changing too drastically, although there has been a steady incline and decline on certain crime types. So in terms of trends that seem to be consistent across cities, we are finding that cities continue to hold the lion's share for the rates of violent crime, which is rather concerning. So about 64% of car hijackings, about 74% of burglaries, and so on continue to happen mainly in the 9 metros that we survey. So those are numbers that still indicate that we need a specific and particular focus on cities because it has bearing on other outcomes in terms of well-being, health, economic sustainability and sustainable development, and the ability to move more people into upward mobility and sustainable livelihoods. So yeah, there is certainly a continued emphasis on the need to focus on cities in terms of long-term responses to crime and violence.
And the difference between the cities, I mean, it seems interesting that Cape Town has such a high rate of murder. I mean, it seems perhaps to be linked to guns, maybe gangsterism in the area?
Yes, so different cities have different drivers of violence and crime. So whereas in Cape Town it might be due to issues of access to illicit firearms, alcohol, harms-related incidents, in cities like eThekwini and indeed Johannesburg, it might be more related to what we refer to as migration factors and kind of the migration of poverty to cities and scarcity. So we emphasize this point around the drivers of crime being also social, spatial, and also economic. So it's about to what extent the space or the spatial design of places disables or enables crime. So different drivers definitely in different cities calling for differentiated approaches. So of course Cape Town has seen increases of about 64% in its murder rates since 2011, which mirror the murder rates of South Africa at the national level in 1994. So a need to focus on the specific drivers there and a focus on hotspots to kind of facilitate crime reduction across the city.
And then how does all of this link to fear? I mean, the fear of crime, it can be crippling for some people, and you can understand why. But I mean, so for example, I mean, Nelson Mandela Bay has high levels of fear of crime, and yet it doesn't seem to have quite the murder rate that other places have.
Of course. So sometimes the rates of crime, the actual rates of crime correlate with the levels of fear, but in some places not so much. So for example, Johannesburg, which would be, as you aptly say, Nelson Mandela Bay doesn't have as high levels of fear, although the murder rates would suggest that fear would be high. Johannesburg has the opposite dynamic, where perceptions of safety, perceptions of of violence and crime and the likelihood to fall victim kind of don't mirror the actual numbers. Johannesburg is one of the cities that have kind of performed positively in terms of the reduction in their murder rates since 2011. So although some cities have seen a steady incline, the city of Johannesburg, together with Tshwane, is one of the ones where there's been steady decline, but perceptions don't suggest that. I think even internationally, perceptions are that Johannesburg is one of the most dangerous cities. And if you had to look at it strictly on the score of murder, the rates of fear don't correlate with the objective data. However, I think that's no reason to discount the role of fear, because I think it's something that cities still need to address quite vigorously, because it also links to whether or not the trust levels between policing and societies or policing and communities are where people feel comfortable enough to report. So the perceptions of crime, perceptions of violence, and rates of fear are things that link to also how societies and communities perceive and relate to policing and law enforcement. Hence, again, we call for what we call integrated approaches, where we say that urban safety and violence and crime prevention are transversal issues, meaning that they are an area that needs the inputs of all of society, not just law enforcement. So together with law enforcement, we advocate very strongly around the need for social crime preventive approaches rather than reactive approaches as well, long-term approaches to crime and violence that address the social drivers, the spatial drivers, issues of the built environment, and also just social attitudes as well as economic drivers. And I think the point that we are driving more than anything is the need to address inequality and exclusion, not just as an abstract idea, but something that is a great contributor to the rates of crime and violence that we have. I think you mentioned in the beginning that our murder rates continue to be about 5 times global averages. So issues of inequality are no longer to be considered as abstract, but as things that have quite a direct bearing on whether cities are sustainable, livable, and meet their developmental role, because we must understand that the largest metros are also players in sustainable development. They have a much bigger role beyond just the mechanical delivery of basic services. They have a developmental role and a role in lifting a lot of our poor and vulnerable out of vulnerability in a sustainable way and in a sustained way.
Can urban planning help? I mean, you talked about the built environment, and how we interact with the built environment. Can changes to urban planning and sort of looking ahead at the cities of the future, can they make a big difference?
Certainly, Stephen. Research is finding that space is a great contributor. It can either disable or enable criminal activity. I think another point linked to this aspect of space is the integration of how we deliver these services. So there's a great need for the institutions that are charged with these areas of delivery, be it human settlements, public space, pavements, parks, that human settlements should have integration with parks and pavements and other public goods and other public infrastructure. Because at the end of the day, people are at the center, and these infrastructures are there to enable active citizenry, integrated communities, social cohesion. And so there should be a great level of what we're finding is that within our systems, what continues to prevail is delivery by components, if I can put it in that sense. Housing and human settlements exist in a silo, similarly with the delivery of public spaces, and there isn't the requisite level of integration that can help in a way that space enables the things that we want to see and the kinds of cities that we want to see, rather than enabling antisocial behaviors.
Siphelele Ngobese, thank you very much indeed. A researcher for inclusive cities at the SA Cities Network. She compiled that crime report.